Hello everyone, my name is Spooky Dude. Let's talk about villains. Whether they're evil turtle kings who can't stop kidnapping princesses or a homicidal flower who wants to kill everyone, it seems like villains are always the most talked about characters from a story, and if done right, are memorable fan favorite characters who are well loved years after they debut. But what makes a good villain? And can we use that information to determine who might be Deltarune's main antagonist? Let's discuss. By the end of this video, I promise you, I will have 4 solid guesses as to who the main antagonist will be. First off, I think it's important to explain the difference between the words villain and antagonist. I'll be using the term antagonist from here on out. See, most stories don't need a villain. Many stories don't even have a villain. Antagonist is a much better word to describe them. For example, Flowey in Undertale, while he acts evil, is better described as an antagonist rather than a villain. The antagonist is any character who directly opposes the protagonist. The protagonist is the main character of a story, or in video games, the character we play as. The protagonist doesn't have to be good, and an antagonist doesn't have to be bad. For example, even though Frisk is doing villainous acts in the genocide route, they're still the protagonist because we play as them. In the movie Fight Club, the main character blows up buildings, does lots of heinous acts, yet can still be called the protagonist since he's the main character. The recent show Andor upset a lot of people when the protagonist and titular character shoots someone to keep them from talking in the first few minutes of the show. But that's the thing, like I said, a protagonist doesn't have to be good, and I'd go as far as to say that morally gray protagonists who are put through the ringer and have their morality tested throughout the story are far more interesting than basic perfect heroes. The opposite can also be true for antagonists. There have been many hero antagonists. In the Batman The Dark Knight Returns comic book, Superman qualifies as an antagonist as he directly opposes Batman numerous times throughout the story. Obviously, Superman is a hero, but in this case, since he's opposing the main character, he's an antagonist. In Shadow the Hedgehog, Shadow fights Sonic many times. Sonic, despite being a clear-cut hero, is classified as an antagonist. In the genocide route, even though Sans is good and is trying to save everyone, he is still the antagonist. My point is, a story can be fantastic, even if the protagonist isn't a good guy and the antagonist isn't a bad guy. So with that out of the way, what makes a good antagonist? There are simply too many things that make a spectacular antagonist for me to talk about here. This video would simply balloon in size. However, I'll instead give you my list of what's most important when writing a good antagonist, as they're the only points I think necessary to try and uncover who Deltarune's antagonist might be. The first thing your antagonist needs is a motive, or a reason for doing what they're doing. In the most literal sense, some characters have motives like, I am going to rob this building to get money, or I am going to destroy this planet to get control over the galaxy. However, when I say motive, I mean even deeper than that. A good antagonist usually believes that what they are doing is worthwhile, or even good in some way. They justify their actions due to their own personal belief system, which I'll get to later. Some antagonists might seem like they have no motive, like Michael Myers in Halloween. He's a mindless, unstoppable killer. However, if you actually watch the original film, you'll see that he only kills a very specific archetype, even going as far as to spare the children, proving that there is some method to his madness. Another thing your antagonist needs is means. This might seem obvious, but if your antagonist can't stand up to the protagonist, then what's the point? Whether it's a mental or physical battle, it's important that the antagonist is able to hurt, and maybe even defeat, the protagonist. Examples of this include Superman 2, in which Superman is quickly outclassed by Zod and his henchmen. We see that Superman, with his current abilities, won't stand a chance against these villains. Another example of this is Fletcher in Whiplash. This isn't a movie about a physical fight, more so a mental struggle as a music teacher pushes one of his students to their limits. We see very quickly that Fletcher has a mental hold over our protagonist, so by the end of the movie he's built up as a massive, very strong antagonist, with the means to destroy our protagonist mentally. Other good examples are Green Goblin from Spider-Man 1, Darth Vader from Star Wars, the T-1000 from Terminator 2, and Annie Wilkins from Misery. All of these characters are shown to have the ability to defeat our protagonists. Even if the antagonists themselves aren't strong enough, they have to be a believable threat to the protagonist. Hans Gruber in Die Hard is just a regular man, facing off against a trained, highly skilled police officer. However, what makes it believable is that Hans will win, is that Hans has a swarm of henchmen who are protecting him and patrolling the building. The next thing an antagonist needs is narrative importance. This one might seem obvious, however, it'll tie into my discussion later. Wouldn't it be odd if a random stormtrooper was the primary antagonist of Star Wars? What if this stormtrooper had insane force abilities and wielded a quadruple-sided lightsaber? At first it might sound cool, but without the narrative relevance of Darth Vader or the Emperor, it really isn't. The primary antagonist doesn't need to be the strongest character of that universe. That random, no-name stormtrooper could be the strongest, most powerful character in all of Star Wars, but something tells me that his defeat wouldn't have been nearly as satisfying as the Emperor's. To put it in Deltarune terms, I think we can agree that while King has a strong motive, is very strong, and has been shown to be able to defeat us, he doesn't have the proper narrative importance to be the primary antagonist. This next point might also seem obvious, but again, it's relevant to our theorizing. The antagonist needs a personal connection to the protagonist. In most movies, this comes naturally, as the two characters have scenes together, battle it out, talk, and overall just form a connection over the course of the movie. Sometimes this connection is much deeper, whether it's the protagonist's parent or sibling, or maybe it's someone that they loved or thought they could trust. Sometimes they are built specifically to share parallels with the protagonist, although this ties into my next point. Overall, if your antagonist is someone that the protagonist has never met and has no conflict with, as I said above, they could be the most powerful character ever, but ultimately fall flat as an antagonist. The last and most important thing, by far, that your antagonist needs is a fundamental belief system that ties into the themes of the film or game and is worth fighting them over. An antagonist's defeat should symbolize the winning of one belief or value over another. Let's analyze that for a second. You see, this here is at the heart of any good story. After all, Undertale did it. The main antagonist, Flowey/Azrael, holds the belief that we won't be able to finish our story without killing at least one person. In his own words, it's kill or be killed. Someone has to die. We eventually learn the history behind the character that leads him to believe this. Frisk obviously holds the opposite belief, though. They believe that we can escape through pacifism. Nobody needs to die. At multiple points, including the neutral ending, it looks as if Flowey was right. However, at the end of the day, through our determination, we prove him wrong. Us escaping the underground doesn't just mean that monsters are free, it symbolizes our philosophy winning. We can end this journey without taking a single life. One of the best superhero movies, and maybe one of the greatest movies ever, also utilizes its core thematic conflict very well. Batman: The Dark Knight has one of the greatest villains put to screen, Heath Ledger as the Joker. Yes, the Joker wants to hurt people, and fight Batman, and he does bad things. But what makes the Joker really, really great is his personal belief system. See, underneath the physical fights and contests between a protagonist and antagonist is a more central moral conflict, a main idea that is presented throughout the entire film or game. And in the case where an antagonist doesn't hold an opposing moral belief, they represent it. The protagonist has a moral battle that only by fighting and defeating the antagonist they can overcome. In The Dark Knight, the Joker's belief is that no one deserves saving, as anyone can become him in an instant. Batman believes the opposite, that everyone deserves saving and that Gotham needs a hero. The Joker throughout the film does bad things that cause Batman to jump into physical action, but deep down it's all in service of proving his belief right. Joker looks like he's been proven right, in the scene where Harvey Dent, someone specifically cited as being Gotham's hero that they need, the very best of Gotham, is turned into the insane, villainous Two-Face. The Joker has seemingly won. The best possible person has turned into him. But in one final act, the Joker sets up a devious plot. He's put bombs on 2 boats filled with civilians, and tells each boat that there's a button on the boat. By pressing it, they can detonate the other boat, protecting themselves. The Joker believes this is the final proof he needs, and that both boats will scramble to press the button. But in a shocking and truth-revealing scene, neither boat will press the button. The civilians decide not to press it. After this scene, the Joker physically loses to Batman, where he gets beaten up. However, it's right here when he really loses. After both boats refuse to press the button, you can see him feel defeat. Here is when he really lost, not here. His moral belief system was proven false, and him getting beat up was symbolic of Batman's beliefs winning over the Joker's. So to recap, a good villain needs a motive, the means to defeat the protagonist, narrative importance, a personal connection to the protagonist, and a core belief or value that they represent, which ties into the themes of the game or movie. How will this help us with Deltarune? Well, before we dive into what the main villain might be, let me give an example of a bad final antagonist. Final Fantasy IX's main antagonist is Kuja. Throughout the entire game, he's the villain that's built up to. By the very end of the game, he's still the main villain until suddenly, the last battle is against this guy. Necron is a complex topic that nowadays many fans attempt to redeem through fan theories and deep dives. However, the character of Necron, whether he's good in a vacuum or bad overall, has no build-up and overall hurts Final Fantasy IX's final battle experience, especially for the vast majority of players who have no desire or ability to suddenly deep dive and theorize about this random character they just met moments before they fight him. Necron fulfills none of the above requirements, besides means and motive. He's an ultimate godlike monster that could probably beat our heroes, and his goal is to eliminate all life. Many players attempt to explain how Necron is indeed connected to the deeper themes of Final Fantasy IX, but as I said before, you need more than that to make a good antagonist. Now maybe Necron isn't that bad, and is redeemable based on fan theories and information found outside the game. However, that's no excuse for the experience fighting him in-game. When you arrive at Necron, most players won't know who he even is, or why you're fighting him. He's not an effective final antagonist. So that brings us to Deltarune. With all this fresh in our minds, we have to acknowledge something very important when predicting the main antagonist. I don't feel like the core theme of Deltarune has made itself known just yet. There are many themes floating around. The idea that our choices don't matter, the balance between light and dark, the meaning of control and the conflict between us and Chris, themes of escapism, and, if you really want to go crazy with it, predestiny. But I'm honestly not sure where the game is going. These all sound like themes from many entirely different games. Surely by the end, the many themes and motifs of the game will all spill into one unified experience, with a meaningful narrative and something to say. However, for now, when predicting who the primary antagonist is, we have to understand we're working at a disadvantage. So let's go through some of the popular candidates and discuss just who could be the primary antagonist of Deltarune. You may have noticed a little extra disdain when talking about Necron, and that's because there's a certain group of characters in Deltarune that I really don't like as the main antagonists. And that's the Titans. Despite many fans believing them to be the primary antagonists, the Titans, unless they're built up to much more in the future, don't seem like primary antagonist material to me. Undertale's final battle was an incredibly personal, very meaningful fight against a character who, in reality, the entire story's central themes had really been about up to that point. The Titans don't even have names. Now, it's true there could be more build-up to the Titans and maybe some characterization, but already we see reasonable means with a strong lack of motives. Ralsei told us that the Titans will lay waste to the land, as the prophecy specifically states, whether we like it or not. That doesn't sound like a bunch of characters who, after deep personal conflict, will come to the conclusion that destroying everything is a good idea. That sounds like a bunch of very strong lumbering giants who, while they'll make for fantastic bosses in the later half of the game, won't make for an excellent primary antagonist. They have a lack of connection to deeper themes, no real motives, and no real connection to the protagonist. Next up is the Angel. The Angel, in a very similar sense to the Titans, is currently built up to as a very powerful entity who may or may not appear in the future. The Angel is even more complex though, as we don't even know anything about them. The Angel is the god that Hometown worships, but beyond that, nothing. It seems like it's a Christianity stand-in, but that tells us very little. The three heroes are set to banish the Angel's heaven, but again, that tells us very little about the Angel. Many popular fan theories believe that the angel might be us, the players, with Angel's Heaven being our connection to Deltarune. Either way, we know too little about the angel to properly judge. We don't even know if they exist in-universe. Now on to the Knight. The Knight is a very strong candidate for being the main antagonist, as currently, they are the main antagonist. So far, our story has been all about tracking down the Knight, and trying to put a stop to them opening up Dark Worlds. Beyond the deep lore mysteries about the Knight that we don't know, like, are they Chris? Who's their real identity? Etc., we also have a lack of strong foundation for their character. We know that, in terms of means, they are implied to have defeated the kings in a battle, placing Spade King in charge. It seems like the Knight probably has the required skills to defeat the Fun Gang in battle. In terms of motive and thematic connection, again, we have very little. The Knight being any specific character would definitely open up the discussions a little, say, like, if the Knight was Noelle. At least then we'd have some foundation to go off of. However, as it is, the Knight may not even be evil. Their choice to open up the Dark Worlds could have spurned from something else. Pretty much 90% of the Deltarune fanbase questions Ralsei and wonders what exactly he's up to, implying there could be a lot that Ralsei hasn't told us. One definitive statement I can make about the Knight is that I don't think their goal is to cause the roaring. If their goal was to cause the roaring, they'd have no need to spend so much time meticulously putting certain characters into power. Why imprison the other kings if all you're trying to do is cause the apocalypse outside of this world, which will kill the kings anyway? Why not just open up as many dark fountains as possible as fast as possible? It seems to me like the Knight has other intentions. Toby Fox has actually already implied that the Knight isn't some kind of throwaway character. In the Undertale 6th Anniversary livestream, Toby describes an animated opening he wanted for the game that would have ended with a shot of the Knight in front of a massive door. It seems to me like the Knight is going to be the primary antagonist, at least for the first half of the game. Perhaps around Chapter 5, we'll battle them, and maybe learn about the true villain. I wouldn't completely write off the Knight being the main antagonist, I just don't personally see it happening. Next up is none other than Ralsei. This one, again, is really weird. Ralsei's whole deal is kinda sketchy, and I believe, personally, Toby wrote many of these scenes to raise suspicion. Not necessarily Kirby Eldritch Horror suspicion, just that he wants us to be alerted to the fact that there's a lot more to Ralsei than we think. It's been implied that Ralsei might leave the party at some point. Ralsei shows up out of nowhere in the cyber world. He speaks to Chris during flashes to Susie's adventure. He takes a strange interest in making sure Susie's happy, and he, overall, has a general sense of mystery surrounding him. It seems like there's definitely more to Ralsei, but does that more mean being a bona fide villain? I doubt it. It seems to me like Ralsei is most interested in fulfilling the prophecy, and weirdly, making sure that Susie is happy. I honestly think there's a good video to make about that in the future. He seems really focused on Susie, and no one seems to be talking about it. I seriously doubt that Ralsei is evil. However, there is a chance that Ralsei becomes a major antagonist. Keep in mind that, as I said before, if an antagonist has a reason for doing what they're doing, they don't need to be evil. They could be fighting over something they believe to be right. Perhaps the fundamental rules of the world aren't exactly as Ralsei described. He does have some pretty deep connections to the larger themes of the game, after all. Overall, I'd say Ralsei has a non-zero chance of being the primary antagonist. While doubtful, I will admit there's enough wiggle room for the Ralsei-related mysteries to be solved in the form of making him some form of antagonist. So that's that. No, before you storm off, I didn't go on this entire rant just to tell you we don't know enough. Obviously not. I do have a few guesses as to who the main antagonist could be. 4 to be exact. First off, the very boring guess of a character we haven't met yet. I'm just throwing this in here to be safe. There's a lot of gameplay left with Deltarune, and I'm sure we'll meet many characters before the end of the game. For all we know, the true antagonist may have just not shown their face yet. As for my second guess, if you held a gun to my head and forced me to choose who I think will be the final antagonist, I'd say W.D. Gaster. Talking about Gaster is, like most candidates, very hard, since we know so little. However, I'd argue that Gaster actually fulfills most of the requirements, despite how little we've seen him. Side note, this is based off the belief that the character from the Goner Maker, Twitter, and File Select is Gaster, which, I mean, come on, it obviously is. In terms of means, Gaster's powers and abilities have only been shown to us as otherworldly, on a level we can't possibly comprehend. It seems like Gaster's abilities involve being able to save, load, and reset. He created the Goner. He personally reached out to us. Surely with his abilities to do all this, he certainly has the ability to fight us. In terms of personal connections, he absolutely has a deep, long-seated personal connection with the protagonist. Keep in mind, as of this point, we, the Soul, are the protagonists, not Chris. We have been searching for Gaster for years. We've made theories, played countless fan games, and written so many comics. Gaster reached out to us and inserted us into the world of Deltarune. If Deltarune really is going to the very meta route and has us, the real-life players, as in-game characters, then there's already a pre-made personal connection baked into the Gaster. If for some reason we aren't literally in Deltarune and the Soul is someone else, there's still signs that perhaps Gaster communicated with Chris or the Soul before. It's not unlikely. In terms of narrative importance, I'm sure we'll see him more before the end of the game, but I mean, come on, he's obviously important enough to be the main villain. The only oddity with this theory is when it comes to his motives and thematic beliefs. So far, Gaster is kind of a good guy. He's upset when we choose not to continue after dying. He's interested in creating a new future with us. A great theory by Tumblr user Determinators points out that Gaster may be specifically searching for a post-pacifist soul. While there's definitely a possibility that Gaster is indeed a more heroic figure than we expected, I think one way or another he'll be the main villain. Maybe there's two Gasters. Maybe Gaster turns on us. Maybe Gaster is nice to us but is cruel to Chris, causing us to rebel against him. I don't know, but we have been told to beware the man who speaks in hands. I honestly believe that almost 10 years of build-up is leading to one of the most climactic antagonists in gaming history. But to many people, that's not an interesting answer. Some people hate when everything is chalked up to Gaster did it. So my third guess. Option number 3, the primary antagonist could be Chris. Now, I know this is a relatively shocking statement, and no, I'm not saying Chris is evil or anything like that. However, there's a few points I'd like to make. First off, they absolutely know something, or some things, that we don't. They open a dark world at the end of Chapter 3, even if we do Snowgrave. They've been talking to Rousey when we aren't around. In terms of means, they absolutely have the ability to work against us, as they've shown multiple times. In terms of a connection to the protagonist, I mean, you can't literally get any more connected than we are to Chris. In terms of motive and deeper meaning, I mean, there's a lot of potential here. As I said before, we don't really know what the overall game is about just yet, but I see a lot of possibilities. Maybe Chris fights us to prove their choices matter. Maybe it has to do with the concept of freedom. Maybe Chris knows we come from a higher, more real plane of existence than them. I don't know. Either way, there's a good chance that Chris can end up as a major antagonist. Many people automatically assume that Chris is going to have a heart-to-heart with us sometimes towards the end of the game, and we'll get over our problems and work together. I don't really know how I feel about this. Something tells me that unless something incredibly drastic happens, we aren't suddenly going to be seeing eye to eye with someone who almost had a panic attack upon realizing they may never get rid of us, and that they'll never have any freedom again. Something tells me if they get their chance, Chris won't hesitate in trying to eliminate us permanently. Unless, of course, there's something else we're missing. I doubt Chris had zero interesting things happen to them before we arrived. Many fan comics and theories speculate that Chris was actually the one to summon us in the first place. Whether it's to have their life be less hard or to send their soul to a better vessel, I can't deny the possibility that Chris invited us into this world for a specific task. Now for my final guess. This is a character I hadn't even considered until I went through the checklist and realized we may have a fantastic antagonist being set up right under our noses. I'm talking about Susie. Now surely this won't be the case, you say. And to be honest, I'm not saying this to get some crazy game theory reaction. I honestly think there's a case to be made for Susie being the primary antagonist. Let's look at the facts. In terms of means, Susie has the ability to fight against us. She's also the only character that's able to frequently act against our influence, just completely deny the soul. She's obviously important enough narratively. In Undertale, the Clam Girl says that Susie might be the reason we're here in the first place. Honestly, the story so far has been about Susie. These quiet moments in both chapters 1 and 2, where Susie reflects on the friends she's made along the way and finds other people that truly care about her, those to me seem like the heart of the story so far. But what about motives? Why would Susie, who's had an amazing time becoming great friends with everyone, suddenly turn against us? And honestly, I think I have the answer. See, let's look at Susie's arc so far. She's neglected at home and may even be homeless, she has no friends and is overall pretty miserable, and starving. The Dark World adventure in Chapter 1 had her finally find people to be friends with. Chris, Rousey, and Lancer all allowed her to open up and be her true self. She has a home in Castletown, friends that she's making, a life that she's enjoying. Or does she? What is Susie going to do when she finds out most of it's been fake in one way or another? The Dark Worlds don't exist. The Darkeners are all fictional objects, something she doesn't realize yet and Rousey has purposefully tried to hide from her. Chris hasn't been there the entire time. It's been us, a different soul, an entirely different entity, puppeteering Chris around. Sure, Chris wasn't unconscious, it's implied they remembered those events, but it was us that Susie opened up to. Finding out that your best friend, the only person you feel comfortable with, was never really there would be a tough blow to take. Surely we're going to be able to close that Castletown fountain. If we weren't, there wouldn't be a huge door sealing off the fountain that's obviously going to open. A lot of people say that'll only happen on Snowgrave, but the weird route hasn't been the evil route. There's clearly more going on there. I have this sinking feeling that Susie's going to lose her friends, her home, and everything that she's gotten to know over the last few days. Susie was the one to tell us your choices don't matter. No one else. What is she going to do when she finds out her choices didn't matter? Lots of potential plot twists also work here. If the game is a time loop, Susie figuring this out makes even more sense for her to become an antagonist. If Rousey is some kind of twist antagonist or is lying about something, it adds to Susie's desire to go rogue. If there's something about the roaring we don't understand, it would make sense for Susie to turn against us in pursuit of something she believes to be heroic. Whatever happens, she may be driven down a dark path, a path that she takes in order to make her life mean something. But that's the thing, her life has meant something. See, while the Darkeners and Chris haven't exactly been what Susie thinks, there are a lot of people who have been. Berdly, Noelle, and most likely everyone she'll meet in the future are all real. The Ferris wheel scene from Chapter 2 was her with another real person, connecting on a level she couldn't have imagined previously. We just need to remind her of this. I think one of Deltarune's larger themes is going to be about fiction and escapism, but I don't think it's going to be as simple as using fiction as a form of escapism is bad. We've seen so far good things come from the Dark Worlds, and at the end of the day, I think Susie will probably be good friends with Chris. However, I think there's a high chance that this will come after she takes on a major antagonistic role. Also, as a side note, I think Versus Susie sounds like a song that has a lot more to it and we only heard a part of it, but that's just a personal thought. So that's that. There's a lot more to say about the topic, including the fact that there are two major routes, yet one ending, and we should ask the question of will there be two primary antagonists, but that, my friends, gets into complicated, long-term, deep lore stuff, and is a topic for another video. Do you agree with me? Tell me in the comments below. Make sure to subscribe, and thank you for watching.